The world knew Mariah Carey as the voice that could shatter glass and break records, the woman who turned Christmas into a billion-dollar industry with 5 notes. But on July 19, 2001, when she walked onto the set of MTV's Total Request Live, wearing an oversized Yankee jersey and wheeling an ice cream cart, something in her eyes told a different story. Behind the forced smile and the manic energy, behind the desperate attempt to appear playful and fun, there was a woman who hadn't slept in 4 days, who had been making disturbing phone calls at odd hours, who had just hours earlier told her mother she wanted to disappear. The cameras captured her handing out popsicles and stripping off the jersey to reveal a tight yellow and green outfit underneath. But they didn't capture what happened shortly before the taping, when she locked herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out, or how her hands shook so badly her assistant had to help her hold the ice cream cart steady. MTV played it as a quirky promotional appearance for her new movie Glitter, a film she had poured everything into. The project that was supposed to prove she was more than just a voice, more than just a pop star, someone who could transcend the narrow definitions the music industry had built around her. But what the audience at home didn't know, what even most of the MTV staff didn't realize until much later, was that they were watching a woman in the middle of a complete mental breakdown. Someone who had been pushed so far past her breaking point that she no longer knew which version of herself was real. And 3 days later, when the news broke that Mariah Carey had been hospitalized for what her publicist carefully called extreme exhaustion and an emotional breakdown, the world would finally understand that something terrible had been happening behind the curtain, something that had been building for years, something that would nearly destroy one of music's biggest stars forever. Before we go deeper into this story, if you appreciate these deep dives into untold moments in music history, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories take real research and time to put together, and your support means everything. Now, let's get back to that July night that changed everything. If you were paying attention to pop music in the 1990s, you remember when Mariah Carey was untouchable. From 1990 to 1998, she had more #1 singles than any artist except the Beatles: Vision of Love, Emotions, Hero, Fantasy, One Sweet Day, Honey. The hits kept coming with mechanical precision, each one showcasing that impossible voice, those whistle notes that seemed to defy human biology. Music critics called her the voice of a generation. Record executives considered her a money-printing machine. She was married to Tommy Mottola, the president of Sony Music, living in a mansion, dominating the charts, appearing to have everything anyone could want. But by 1998, when Mariah finally left that marriage, she was 30 years old and desperate to prove she was more than just a manufactured pop star, more than just a voice in a recording studio. She wanted to act, to produce, to write films, to show the world she had artistic vision beyond singing. And that desperation, that need to prove herself after years of being controlled and managed, would lead directly to the disaster that almost ended everything. The idea for Glitter came to Mariah in 1999, during a period when she should have been celebrating her freedom. Her album, Butterfly, released right after leaving Tommy, had been both a commercial and critical triumph. Rainbow in 1999 gave her another #1 with Heartbreaker. She was dating Derek Jeter, living in New York, making her own decisions for the first time in nearly a decade. But freedom came with its own pressure. She had to prove that her success wasn't just about being with the right people at the right time, that her talent was real, that she could succeed completely on her own terms. So when 20th Century Fox approached her about starring in a film, a story about a young singer in 1980s New York who rises from nightclub performer to superstar, Mariah saw it as her chance to show what she was really capable of. She negotiated a deal that gave her creative control, the ability to produce the soundtrack, input on the script, approval over casting. She threw herself into the project with an intensity that worried the people closest to her, working 18-hour days, managing every detail, convinced that Glitter would be her artistic statement, the thing that would finally make people take her seriously. But from the beginning, there were problems that Mariah either couldn't see or refused to acknowledge. The script, which she had helped write, was predictable and glitched, hitting every expected beat of the rise to fame story without adding anything new or interesting. The 1980s setting, meant to evoke nostalgia, instead felt dated and disconnected from 2001 pop culture. The soundtrack was strong musically, but didn't match the energy or innovation of her previous work. Most concerning was Mariah's performance as Billy Frank, the lead character. She had never acted before, had never taken a class or studied the craft, and it showed in every scene. Her line delivery was stiff and unconvincing, her emotional range limited, her presence on screen more uncomfortable than charismatic. The director tried to work with her, to coach her through scenes, but Mariah had convinced herself she knew what she was doing, that her instincts were correct, that the performance would work because it was authentic and personal. Test screenings in early 2001 were disastrous. Audiences laughed at moments meant to be dramatic, cringed at the dialogue, walked out before the ending. Focus groups said the film felt like an expensive vanity project, that Mariah should stick to singing, that the whole thing was embarrassing to watch. The studio, which had invested $40 million in production and planned another $30 million for marketing, started to panic. They pushed the release date from spring to September, hoping more time and editing could save the project. They brought in new editors, tried different cuts, tested various versions with different audiences. Nothing worked. Glitter was a bad film, and no amount of tinkering was going to change that reality. And Mariah, who had bet everything on this project, who had spent 2 years of her life making it happen, who had convinced herself it was going to redefine her career, was coming apart at the seams. The negative test screenings felt like personal attacks, like the world was rejecting not just the film but her vision, her worth as an artist. She stopped sleeping, surviving on a few hours a night, her mind racing with anxiety and paranoia. She stopped eating regular meals, dropping weight in a way that alarmed her friends and family. She started making strange phone calls at odd hours, rambling about conspiracies and betrayals, convinced that people were plotting against her, that the media had decided to destroy her regardless of what she did. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. She would cancel meetings at the last minute or not show up at all. She would burst into tears for no apparent reason, then laugh wildly seconds later. She talked endlessly about Glitter becoming a massive success, about proving everyone wrong, about showing the world her true potential, but her certainty felt desperate rather than confident, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. The people around her, her manager, her assistants, her mother Patricia, could see she was in crisis, but Mariah refused to slow down, refused to take a break, refused to acknowledge that something was seriously wrong. She had to promote the film, had to do the talk show appearances, had to make sure everyone knew about Glitter. Stopping, even for a moment, felt like admitting defeat. That's what led to the MTV Total Request live appearance on July 19, 2001. But the moment Mariah walked onto that MTV set, everyone in the studio sensed something was terribly wrong. She was moving too fast, talking too loud, her energy frantic rather than excited. When Carson Daly tried to interview her about the film, her answers were rambling and unfocused, jumping from topic to topic without completing thoughts, her eyes darting around the studio like she was looking for something or someone. She started handing out popsicles to the audience, trying to generate the kind of spontaneous fun the show was known for, but her movements were jerky and uncoordinated, her smile too wide, her laugh too sharp. Then, without warning or explanation, she stripped off the Yankees jersey, revealing the tight outfit underneath, and started talking about how she needed to cool down, how she was too hot, how everything was too hot, her words coming faster and faster until they stopped making sense. Carson Daly tried to redirect, tried to keep the interview on track, but Mariah wasn't really listening anymore, wasn't really present in the moment. She was somewhere else, trapped in whatever private nightmare was consuming her mind. The appearance lasted less than 10 minutes before producers ended it early, claiming they were running out of time, but everyone in the studio knew what had really happened. Mariah was escorted off the set into a private room, where she sat alone for 20 minutes, rocking back and forth, her hands covering her face, making sounds that weren't quite crying but weren't quite anything else either. Her assistant finally got her into a car and back to her Tribeca apartment, where Mariah immediately locked herself in her bedroom and wouldn't come out or answer the phone or respond to anyone knocking. Her mother, Patricia, who had been warning people for weeks that Mariah was heading toward a breakdown, drove to the apartment and let herself in with a spare key. What she found would lead to a hospitalization that shocked the entertainment world. Mariah was sitting on the floor of her bathroom, still in the outfit from MTV, completely disconnected from reality, speaking in fragments that didn't connect to anything. She wasn't making eye contact, wasn't really responding to questions, seemed disconnected from reality in a way that suggested something far more serious than exhaustion or stress. Patricia called Mariah's psychiatrist, who came immediately, and together they convinced Mariah to go to the hospital. She was admitted on July 22, 2001, to an undisclosed medical facility in Connecticut, where she could receive treatment away from the media spotlight that was about to explode. The news broke 3 days later, and the media reaction was immediate and brutal. Entertainment Tonight, Access Hollywood, Extra, every celebrity news program in America ran segments about Mariah's breakdown, showing footage from the MTV appearance, speculating about drugs and mental illness, interviewing pop culture experts who offered theories about what had caused the collapse. The tabloids were even worse, running covers with headlines like Mariah's meltdown, Pop Princess falls apart, and the end of Mariah Carey. Websites posted frame-by-frame analyses of the TRL appearance, pointing out every awkward moment, every strange comment, every sign that something was wrong. Radio DJs made jokes about the ice cream cart in the Yankees jersey, turning Mariah's crisis into comedy material. The gossip machine that had built her up for a decade was now tearing her down with the same enthusiasm, treating her breakdown as entertainment rather than tragedy, as scandal rather than illness. And underneath all the speculation and jokes and concern was a darker narrative starting to take shape, a narrative that said Mariah Carey's career was over, that she had flown too close to the sun, that she was another cautionary tale about the price of fame and the dangers of ego, and the inevitable fall that comes when you try to be more than you really are. But the truly devastating blow came on September 11, 2001, when Glitter was released in theaters nationwide. That morning, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people, changing America forever, making everything that had seemed important the day before suddenly feel trivial and meaningless. Movie theaters across the country were empty as people stayed home to watch the news and process the horror. Glitter, which would have struggled even under normal circumstances, was completely buried by the timing of its release. It opened to $2.5 million in ticket sales, one of the lowest openings ever for a film with a major star and a major marketing budget. Critics savaged it, calling it one of the worst films of the year, mocking the script, the performances, the music, everything. The soundtrack album, which under normal circumstances might have at least produced a hit single or two, debuted at number 7 on the charts and quickly fell, unable to gain any traction in a media environment completely dominated by coverage of the terrorists' attacks and their aftermath. Virgin Records, which had signed Mariah to a $100 million contract in 2001 specifically because they believed she was still a massive commercial force, immediately began looking for ways to exit the deal, to cut their losses, to distance themselves from what was rapidly becoming one of the biggest commercial and critical failures in recent pop music history. By October 2001, less than 3 months after her hospitalization, Mariah Carey's career appeared to be in ruins. The film had bombed, the album had flopped, her record deal was in jeopardy, her reputation was destroyed. The media had moved from covering her breakdown with concern to covering her career collapse with barely disguised glee. And Mariah herself was still in treatment, still trying to piece together what had happened, still trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so completely and so quickly. Recovery was slow and painful and private. Mariah spent weeks in treatment, working with therapists, learning about the bipolar disorder that had gone undiagnosed for much of her life, understanding that the manic energy and the depressive crashes and the permuted ability to regulate her emotions weren't personal failures, but symptoms of an illness that could be treated and managed. She worked on rebuilding her sense of self outside of her career, outside of her achievements, outside of what other people thought about her. She reconnected with her mother and her siblings in ways that were more honest and vulnerable than ever before. It was the kind of deep therapeutic work that most people don't have to do in public, under media scrutiny, with their failures and struggles broadcast to millions. But Mariah didn't have that luxury. Every step of her recovery was documented, analyzed, discussed by people who had never met her but felt entitled to opinions about her life. The comeback began quietly. In 2002 with an album called Charmbrace. It wasn't a commercial blockbuster, didn't produce massive hit singles or dominate the charts the way her 90s albums had, but it was a statement of survival. Proof that Mariah was still here, still making music, still fighting, The critics were mostly kind, recognizing the vulnerability in the lyrics, the maturity in the vocals, the growth in the songwriting. Fans who had stuck with her through the breakdown were relieved and supportive, showing up to concerts, buying the album, defending her online against people who said she was washed up or finished. But the album was just the beginning, the first step in what would become one of the most remarkable comebacks in pop music history. And as Mariah continued working with her therapists, as she continued processing what had happened to her, she began to understand something that would change everything. Something that explained not just the 2001 breakdown, but years of pain and confusion that had come before it. The breakthrough came during a therapy session in late 2003. More than 2 years after the hospitalization, Mariah was talking about the pressure she had felt making Glitter, the need to prove herself, the desperation to show she could succeed without help or guidance or control. And her therapist asked a question that seemed simple, but opened a door Mariah had been keeping locked for years. Why did you feel you needed to prove that? What were you really trying to escape? And suddenly, Mariah was crying, really crying for the first time since the breakdown, and she was talking about Tommy Mottola, about the years of marriage that felt more like imprisonment, about the way she had been controlled and monitored and treated like property rather than a person. She talked about the mansion in Bedford that looked like paradise but felt like a prison, about the security cameras that tracked her movements, about the phone calls that were listened to, about the friends she wasn't allowed to see and the music she wasn't allowed to make and the life she wasn't allowed to live. She talked about how Tommy had kept detailed journals of her behavior, analyzing her moods, tracking her interactions, planning strategies to maintain control. She talked about discovering those journals years later and feeling sick reading them, seeing herself described not as a wife or a partner but as a problem to be managed, a resource to be protected, an asset that needed careful handling. She talked about the way Tommy had isolated her from anyone who might encourage her independence, the way he had positioned himself as her protector while actually being her jailer, the way he had made her doubt her own instincts and trust his judgment over her own. And she talked about how escaping that marriage in 1998 had been the beginning of freedom, but not the end of the damage. How she had carried that trauma with her even after the divorce. How it had poisoned her relationship with herself and her work and her understanding of what she was capable of. The Glitter breakdown, Mariah finally understood, wasn't really about the film failing or the critics being harsh or the timing being terrible. It was about years of unprocessed trauma finally demanding attention. About a mind and body that had been pushed past their limits, trying to prove something that should never have needed proving in the first place. She had been trying to show the world she could succeed without Tommy's control, without his guidance, without his machine behind her. But what she should have been doing was healing from the damage that control had caused. The breakdown wasn't weakness or failure or instability. It was her system finally saying enough, finally refusing to continue pretending everything was fine. Finally demanding that she deal with the pain she had been carrying for years. Understanding that changed everything. It meant the 2001 crisis wasn't something to be ashamed of, or hidden, or explained away. It was a necessary part of her journey, a painful but ultimately healing process that allowed her to finally confront the truth about what had been done to her, and begin the real work of recovery. And that understanding, that clarity about what she had survived and what she was capable of, became the foundation for what came next. In 2005, Mariah released The Emancipation of Mimi, and the title itself was a declaration. Mimi was her childhood nickname, the name her family used, the name that represented who she really was underneath all the fame and expectations and public persona. Emancipation meant freedom from bondage, liberation from control, the ability to finally be herself without apology or compromise. The album was everything Glitter wasn't, focused and confident and mature, showcasing Mariah's voice at its best, featuring production that felt contemporary without trying too hard, including songs that were personal without being self-indulgent. But more than anything, it was joyful, full of life in a way that felt earned rather than manufactured. We Belong Together, the lead single, became a cultural phenomenon. It topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 14 weeks, longer than any Mariah song since One Sweet Day in 1995. It dominated radio, played at weddings and parties and proms, became one of those songs that defined a moment in pop culture. The music video featured Mariah in scenes reminiscent of her early 90s videos, a deliberate reclamation of her legacy, a reminder of how dominant she had been before everything fell apart. The Emancipation of Mimi went on to sell over 12 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of 2005 and one of the best-selling albums of the entire decade. It won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Contemporary R&B Album, and on the night of the 2006 Grammy Awards, when Mariah walked onto that stage to accept her awards, when she looked out at an audience that included every major figure in the music industry, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just pride or satisfaction or proof of her talent, but peace. She had survived something that destroys most people who experience it. She had survived the public humiliation and the career collapse and the mental health crisis. She had confronted the trauma of her past, understood how it had shaped her, and refused to let it define her future. Standing on that Grammy stage, holding those awards, Mariah wasn't just celebrating commercial success or critical acclaim. She was celebrating the fact that she was still here, still creating, still fighting, still refusing to be broken by the things that had tried to break her. The woman who had walked onto the MTV set in 2001 with an ice cream cart and a desperate smile had been drowning, unable to ask for help, unable to save herself. The woman standing on the Grammy stage in 2006 had learned how to swim, how to breathe, how to trust herself again. That transformation, that journey from breakdown to breakthrough, became Mariah's most important story, more significant than any record sales or chart positions or awards. In 2020, she published her memoir, The Meaning of Mariah Carey, and finally told that story in her own words, without filters or management or concern for how it would be received. She wrote about Tommy's control with brutal honesty, describing the surveillance and isolation and manipulation in detail that made readers understand just how dark those years had been. She wrote about the glitter breakdown, not as a shameful secret, but as a turning point. The moment when everything that had been broken inside her finally demanded to be healed. She wrote about the therapy that saved her life, the diagnosis that explained so much, the medication and treatment that allowed her to manage her bipolar disorder rather than being controlled by it. And she wrote about the comeback, not as a resurrection, but as a completion. The final proof that she had not just survived trauma but transcended it. The memoir spent weeks on bestseller lists, praised for its honesty and vulnerability and refusal to soft-pedal the difficult parts of her journey. Reading it, you understand that Mariah Carey's story isn't about falling and rising, failing and succeeding, being broken and fixed. It's about being human, about surviving impossible pressure, about learning that asking for help isn't weakness, and that healing takes time, and that you can be both successful and struggling, both talented and traumatized, both a superstar and a person who needs support and understanding and compassion. That's the real legacy of the 2001 breakdown and the 2005 comeback. Not just that Mariah survived, though that matters, not just that she succeeded again, though that's remarkable, but that she showed millions of people watching that mental illness doesn't have to be career-ending, that trauma can be healed, that it's possible to fall apart completely and still find your way back to wholeness, that the worst thing that ever happens to you doesn't have to be the last thing that defines you.